The winter afternoon held a delicate hush, broken only by the whispering wind and the faint rustle of leaves. In Greenfield Park, the sky hung low in muted grays, and a gentle fog wrapped the trees like a shroud of secrets. Children played off in the distance, their laughter echoing faintly through the cold air, while the scent of roasted corn blended with the earthy aroma of damp soil. On a solitary bench near the duck pond, Grace sat in silence. Her coat was worn and frayed, and her gaze drifted somewhere between memory and survival. Her hands, marked by cold and years, clutched a chipped thermos that no longer kept anything warm. Yet she sat there with a quiet presence, gentle, almost invisible, as if the world had forgotten she existed, though she was still watching it closely. That's when she saw the boy. A small figure darted across the field, chasing pigeons with a laugh full of joy and mischief. He couldn't have been older than 5. His cheeks were red from the cold, and his scarf trailed behind him like a flag of innocence. Grace smiled faintly, but in an instant everything changed. The boy tripped suddenly, violently, and hit the gravel path hard. His cry tore through the quiet. People turned, glanced, but no one moved. A woman hesitated, then walked away. No one came, except her. Grace stood without thinking. Her feet moved before fear or doubt could catch up. She knelt beside him, hands trembling, not from the cold this time, but from the sudden, overwhelming sense of purpose. A trickle of blood ran from his scraped knee, and tears streamed freely down his face. "Hey!" "Shh, it's all right," she said softly, brushing the hair from his forehead with her sleeve. "You're okay, sweetheart. Just a little fall." The boy looked up, startled, but didn't pull away. Something in her voice, or maybe in the calm, gentle way she looked at him, made him trust her. From her worn satchel, she pulled a small pack of tissues and a faded bottle of antiseptic she usually kept for herself. With careful, practiced hands, she cleaned the wound and tied a clean strip of cloth around it. "There," she whispered. "Like magic." He sniffled. "My shoe." Grace noticed the laces had come undone and knotted into a tangled mess. She gently turned his foot, then began tying them, double knot, the way her grandmother had taught her. As she did, a sleek black car pulled up a few meters away. Inside, James Whitmore watched. He'd seen the fall. He'd been on a phone call, waiting for his son to finish playing before they went to dinner. But when he saw a stranger, a homeless woman, clearly rush over to his son, his heart skipped a beat. Instinct urged him to act, to intervene, but something made him wait. Now from behind the windshield, James saw something unexpected. The way she touched his son's knee, the way she spoke, free of pity or condescension, the quiet dignity in her every movement, even as her hands trembled, and his son sitting there calm, unafraid. He ended the call, stepped out of the car. As James approached, the boy noticed and lit up. "Daddy!" Grace turned quickly. Her heart dropped. She hadn't stopped to think, hadn't wondered who the child belonged to. She stood up fast, brushing her skirt down, as if that could make her more presentable. But her gaze stayed low. James knelt by his son. "Are you all right, Michael?" Michael nodded enthusiastically. "I fell, but she fixed it." James looked up at the woman. Her clothes were faded, her coat oversized, her shoes full of wear. But her eyes, tired, yes, held something steady, something resilient. He expected to see shame or maybe fear, but what she offered instead was a quiet, unwavering look. "I'm sorry if I overstepped," she said. Her voice was soft but strong. "He was alone. I didn't want him to feel scared." "You didn't overstep," James said. "You helped him." There was a pause. A kind of stillness neither of them knew how to fill. "Thank you," he added, and he meant it. Grace nodded and turned to walk away. "Wait," James called after her. She stopped. He hesitated. "Would you join us for dinner?" She turned slowly. "I don't think that's a good idea." Michael tugged at her sleeve. "Please, you can sit next to me." Grace looked down at the boy, at the makeshift bandage on his knee, at the trust in his eyes. Something stirred deep inside her, something she hadn't felt in years. Still, her voice wavered. "I'm not dressed for dinner." James offered a smile. "It's just a diner down the street. Nothing fancy, and it would mean a lot to both of us." She looked around, the bench, her old satchel, the fading light. She hadn't been invited to a meal in years. She hadn't been seen in years. "All right," she said, "but just dinner." Michael clapped with joy. James extended a hand. She didn't take it, but she walked beside him. Their shadows stretched across the pavement, like two separate stories beginning to intertwine. And inside the warm, humming glow of the diner ahead, something quietly unexpected was about to unfold. The bell above the door jingled softly as they stepped inside. Warm air rushed to meet them, filled with the scent of buttered toast, sizzling bacon and a hint of ground coffee. A jukebox in the corner played a slow tune from another time. Not loud, just enough to feel like nostalgia. Grace paused near the entrance. The sudden warmth flushed her cheeks, and she became painfully aware of her coat, worn and threadbare, hugging her arms. She folded it across her chest, trying to disappear. James noticed. He gently motioned to a booth, in the corner with a red leather seat, and a view of the window. "Let's sit here," he said, offering a smile that wasn't pitying or forced, just genuine. And that, more than anything, disarmed her. Michael slid into the booth first, his legs dangling above the floor. Grace sat across from him, her eyes quickly scanning the polished table. The laminated menu, the silverware perfectly in place. These things weren't part of her world anymore. "I like pancakes for dinner," Michael announced suddenly, as if she'd asked. "With chocolate chips." Grace smiled. "Sounds like a good choice." "What about you?" James asked. "What do you like?" She hesitated. It had been so long since someone cared to ask. She looked at the menu, not searching for options, just for something familiar. I'll just have tea," she said quietly. "Tea and maybe a sandwich," he offered gently. She met his eyes for a second. Her instinct was to refuse, but his tone held no pity, no attempt to rescue, just kindness, simple and true. And somehow that was harder to handle. All right. "A sandwich is fine." The waitress came by, bright and friendly. "Ready to order?" "2 chocolate chip pancakes," James said, nodding toward Michael. "Tea and a sandwich, please," Grace added, still looking down. "And I'll have the special." As the waitress walked away, silence settled. Awkward at first, then warm. "So," James said, folding his hands, "Michael and I usually come here on Fridays. It's our little tradition." Michael nodded. "Sometimes Daddy lets me have 2 milkshakes. Only after vegetables," James said with playful sternness. Grace watched them, quietly moved. There was no coldness between them, no distance. They talked like best friends, like a real father and son. "You two are very close," she said softly. James looked at his boy, then back at her. "He's all I've got." A quiet beat passed. "And his mother?" she asked before she could stop herself. James didn't flinch, but his eyes grew softer. "She passed away 3 years ago." "I'm sorry." "Thank you." Grace lowered her gaze. Her fingers traced silent shapes on the table. "And you?" James asked. "Where are you from, Grace?" Her name in his voice felt unfamiliar, like something long buried being brought back to life. "I grew up in the South," she said slowly. "My grandmother raised me. She passed when I was 17. And after that?" She shrugged. "I moved. Tried to work, life, didn't make it easy." She didn't elaborate, he didn't press. The tea arrived hot and fragrant. She wrapped her hands around the cup, letting the warmth soak into her fingers, quieting the tremor she hadn't realized was there. Michael leaned across the table. "You tied my shoe like my mom used to," he said. Grace blinked. "I did?" He nodded. "The double knot. She always said it kept adventures from falling apart." She smiled. For a moment, her whole face softened. "She sounds like she was very wise." "She was," James said quietly. Memory in his tone. The food came warm and comforting. Grace didn't realize how hungry she was until she took a bite. It was just a turkey sandwich, but it felt like a banquet. The warmth, the salt, the crunch. It reminded her of Sundays long ago, before everything came undone. James watched her not with judgment, but with genuine curiosity. This woman, fragile and fierce all at once, was unlike anyone he'd ever met. She didn't ask for anything. She didn't try to impress. She just was, and that alone felt extraordinary. They talked about small things, Michael's favorite stories, the pigeons in the park, Grace shared how birds used to follow her when she fed them crumbs from her coat. Michael laughed, eyes sparkling. At one point he reached out and held her hand. "Will you come to the park tomorrow too?" Grace froze. Her hand trembled under his. I'm not sure," she whispered. "Please." James said nothing, just watched. She looked at him. "I don't want to confuse him." "You're not," James said. "You're comforting him." She looked down at Michael's little fingers, wrapped around hers. Maybe if the weather's good." Michael beamed. Later, as they stepped outside, the wind had picked up again. James offered her a ride. "I don't really have a somewhere," she said softly. "But thank you." He didn't push. He helped Michael into the car, buckling him in carefully. Then he turned to her. "Grace." She looked up. "I know this is different, but if you ever want to talk or need anything, I'd like to help." She swallowed. "Why?" He paused. "Because I saw the way you looked at him, like he mattered." She didn't answer, just nodded, then turned and slowly walked into the evening fog. From inside the car, Michael waved with both hands. James started the engine but didn't drive off right away. He watched her silhouette fade into the mist, and in that still, quiet moment, none of them knew that this was only the beginning of something no amount of time or pain would ever truly erase. The days that followed slipped into a familiar rhythm. Grace returned to the park each afternoon, not out of hope, but habit. She sat on the same bench near the pond, hands buried in her coat pockets, watching the children play from afar. The wind had turned sharper. The trees were nearly bare now, and the days ended more quickly, as if winter were quietly closing in, on time, on memory, on possibility. But she never saw Michael again. She told herself it was for the best. One meal, one evening, it didn't mean anything. People offered kindness in passing, and then went back to their real lives. The boy had smiled at her, but that didn't make her part of his world. He had warmth and comfort. She had sidewalks and shadows. Still, something inside her stirred every time she saw a child with a trailing scarf. Something ached when she passed the diner window and saw a family laughing inside. Then one afternoon, she stopped to help Maria, the corn vendor near the park gate. The woman was struggling with a heavy propane tank and wincing from back pain. Grace offered her help, lifting it with surprising strength for someone so small. Maria smiled gratefully and handed her a hot ear of corn wrapped in foil. "You've got strong arms," Maria teased. "You should be charging me." Grace laughed, genuinely, for the first time in weeks. She had just finished eating and was wiping her hands when a voice called from behind. "Grace?" She turned. There he was, Michael, running toward her, scarf flying, eyes glowing like tiny suns. "You came back!" Before she could speak, he threw his arms around her waist. Grace stood frozen for a moment, her hands hovering in the air before slowly resting on his back. James followed a few steps behind, walking calmly in a long black coat. His hair was neatly combed, but what softened his face wasn't style, it was relief. "I was hoping we'd find you again," he said, stopping next to them. Grace gently pulled away from Michael. "I didn't think you'd come back. I was out of town for work, but Michael insisted this was the first place we should go this morning." Michael nodded eagerly. "I missed you." Grace knelt down to meet his eyes. "I missed you too, little one." James waited until she stood again. "Can we talk?" "Just for a minute." She hesitated but nodded. They walked a short distance from the vendor cart. Michael skipped ahead, tossing breadcrumbs to a flock of pigeons that fluttered around him. "I've been thinking," James began, "about that night at the diner and about what you did for him in the park." Grace looked down, unsure where he was going with this. "He talks about you all the time," James continued. "He's not usually this open, especially not with strangers." Grace smiled faintly. "Maybe I'm not a stranger anymore." "That's just it," he said. "You're not." She looked up at him now, her eyes filled with quiet confusion. "I wanted to ask, would you consider spending time with him again? After school, just a few hours each day, not as a nanny, more like a companion, someone he trusts?" Her instinct was immediate, no. She stepped back. "I'm not who you think I am." "James," she said, her voice tight with emotion, "I don't have a resume. I don't have clean clothes. I don't even have a place to live." "I know." "No, you don't," she pressed, her voice cracking. You don't know what I've done to survive. You don't know what people would say if they saw me with your son." "I do," he said gently. "And I don't care." She stared at him, stunned into silence. "I care about the woman who helped my son without hesitation. I care about the way you tied his shoes like it meant something. That's the person I'm asking." "But I'm not—" "You're exactly who you are," he said, cutting her off. "And that's enough." A gust of wind passed between them, carrying the scent of roasted corn and wet pavement. "I'd pay you fairly. You'd have a place to sleep, food, privacy. We have a guest room." Grace blinked rapidly, trying to keep back the wave rising in her chest. "I don't want pity." "This isn't pity," James replied. "It's gratitude. And maybe the start of something different." She looked over at Michael, still feeding pigeons and laughing as they circled around him. "You'd trust me with him?" she whispered. "I already have." Grace didn't respond for a long time. Finally, quietly, she asked, "Can I think about it?" James smiled. "Of course. But we'd love to have you." He turned and called Michael, who ran to him without hesitation. As they walked away, Michael looked back and waved. "Come visit soon, Grace." She nodded, her heart heavy with something she didn't yet know how to name. Hope, maybe. That evening, she sat on her bench longer than usual, holding the foil from the corn like it was a letter she hadn't dared to open. Her eyes stayed fixed on the horizon, where the city lights blurred into fog, where the past quietly met the edge of something new. And for the first time in years, she imagined what it might feel like to open a door and be expected on the other side. The gates of the Whitmore estate opened slowly, revealing a long cobblestone driveway lined with ancient trees. The sound of tires over gravel blended with the respectful stillness of dusk. In the back seat, Grace sat stiffly, barely breathing. Her hands rested tensely in her lap. The jacket she wore was borrowed from James, too big but warm. With every meter the car moved forward, she felt herself stepping deeper into a world she didn't belong to. When the car finally stopped at the main entrance, Grace swallowed hard. The house was imposing, colonial with modern touches, wide windows, white columns, and a porch lit with warm golden lights that somehow made the space feel inviting. Despite its grandeur, it didn't look like a place someone like her would ever belong. And yet, here she was. James opened the door and helped Michael out first. Grace hesitated for a second before placing her feet on the polished stones. The air was colder here, cleaner. The noise of the city had vanished. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. The front door opened. A tall woman stood in the doorway, straight posture, impeccable clothing, sharp gaze. Anna, the housekeeper. James introduced them as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Anna, this is Grace. She'll be staying with us for a while and helping with Michael after school." Anna nodded politely, but her eyes scanned Grace from head to toe. Too slow, too cold. Grace knew that look. It wasn't anger, just judgment, and maybe a trace of disguised pity. "Your room is ready," Anna said before turning and walking back inside. James offered Grace an encouraging smile. "You'll get used to it, I promise." She stepped into the house, her worn shoes squeaking slightly on the polished wooden floor. The walls were light, decorated with landscape paintings, shelves of books and cozy furniture. Nothing was overly extravagant, but everything smelled like home, a kind of home she had never known. They climbed a staircase that creaked softly, and James led her to a room at the end of the hall. The door was slightly open. It was small but warm. A single bed with clean sheets, a modest wardrobe, and a chair by the window. A folded outfit rested on the seat. Fresh towels in the corner. Grace stepped in slowly, as if crossing into sacred ground. "If you need anything else, let me know," James said. "Make yourself comfortable. Michael will be thrilled to see you in the morning." She nodded, unable to speak. When he gently closed the door behind him, a thick silence filled the room. Grace exhaled the breath she'd been holding since the gates opened. Her eyes scanned the space. The white quilt looked new. The lamp's soft light warmed the air. She approached the mirror hanging on the wall. The woman reflected there didn't quite belong. Hair tied with a worn elastic. Skin weathered by time and the streets. Eyes that had seen too much. And yet, something about her looked different. There was a trace of humanity she thought she had lost. She removed her shoes, placed her bare feet on the rug, and for one brief, silent moment, she felt safe. The next morning, the smell of fresh bread and coffee drifted through the hallway. As she came downstairs, she found Michael already at the table, grinning, his hair tousled from sleep. "Grace, you really slept here." "I did," she said, sitting slowly. "It was nice to sleep in silence." James appeared moments later, sleeves rolled up, a relaxed smile on his face. "Good morning. Anna made breakfast. Help yourself." Grace didn't quite know how to behave. The porcelain cup in her hands felt too fragile, too refined, compared to the styrofoam lids she was used to. Still, she drank carefully and let the slightly bitter taste fill her with a new kind of comfort. Throughout the day, James showed her the house routine. Michael would come home from school around 4 p.m., and from then until dinner, she'd be with him. Homework, games, stories. Whatever they chose to do together. "You don't have to be someone else, Grace," James told her as they walked through the backyard garden. "You just need to be here. That's what he needs." But not every look was as kind. Anna remained professional, but distant. She never said anything rude, but her silence spoke volumes. In the absence of words, in the avoided glances, Grace felt the quiet rejection. Still, she didn't complain. She had lived through far worse. And for the first time in years, there was a roof above her head, a door that closed, a bed to call her own. That night, after Michael had fallen asleep hugging his new book, Grace returned to her room. The house was quiet, except for the wind tapping gently at the window. She sat in the armchair, wrapped herself in a blanket, and stared into the night outside. She didn't know how long this place would be hers. Maybe a week, maybe less. The world was too uncertain for promises. But for now it was shelter. And that was more than she had dared to ask for. Life began to move at a different pace after that Christmas. In some way, Alexander's presence felt like a lighthouse, guiding us back to the surface, where the light was a little brighter and the air a little easier to breathe. I knew I couldn't rely on him forever. But even so, something inside me wanted to understand more. I wanted to know who he really was, why he was doing all of this. Because, in my life, people had only helped when they had something to gain. I no longer knew how to tell the difference between a sincere gesture and mere convenience. And it was on a rainy afternoon in January that I got the chance. Alexander invited me for coffee in the lobby of one of his hotels. I hesitated before saying yes. The fear of the unknown always lingered, but the desire to understand what he truly wanted from us weighed heavier. The girls were at school, and I knew this was the moment. When I arrived at the hotel, the doorman greeted me with a smile that felt rehearsed. The marble staircase reflected the soft lighting, and the sound of my footsteps mixed with the whisper of rain against the windows. The place was luxurious, but not in a cold way. It felt warm, like a big home, and in that moment, the comfort of that space stood in direct contrast to the chill outside. Alexander was already seated at the table, a cup of coffee in front of him. He stood up as soon as he saw me. "Caroline," he said with a genuine smile, "please sit. I've been waiting for you." I sat down, still a little tense, and he handed me a warm cup. The steam rose gently into the air. There was something calming about him, as if he carried a kind of peace I had never known. "How are the girls?" he asked. "They're doing well. Excited about school. Lucy's loving her art classes. Abby, well, she's always been quieter, but there's something special in her. I see a sparkle in their eyes that I hadn't seen in a long time. They're growing, Alexander." He paused, sipping his coffee. "And how are you?" I hesitated. I didn't know what to say. I was tired, yes, but it wasn't just that. In many ways I felt lost, but something in his eyes made me want to be honest. I don't really know, honestly. I'm not sure I've ever really known how to just be, how to live, how to accept. I think I've spent so much time trying to keep things under control for the girls' sake that I've kind of lost sight of who I am. Alexander listened carefully, never rushing to interrupt, and I kept going. I've worked so hard just to keep us going, to keep a roof over our heads, that I haven't had a moment to look inward. I've always been the strong woman, the one who doesn't complain, the one who fixes everything on her own. But deep down, I don't think I've ever really known what it feels like to have someone beside me. Someone who sees who I am, not just what I do. I stopped talking for a moment, shame creeping up on me. But Alexander didn't look at me with judgment. He was just present, listening, and I don't know if that's a good thing or just the result of living on autopilot for too long. He gave a small smile. Caroline, you don't have to be strong all the time. You're allowed to rest. You're allowed to let yourself be seen. There's no shame in that. His words stayed with me, like they were touching a place inside me I didn't even know was still alive. As if he somehow understood a pain I'd never spoken out loud. The pain of carrying the world alone, never asking for help. The weight of being the pillar when all you really want is to be held. I know you're not asking for anything, Caroline, but maybe it's time to accept something. To accept that there's more waiting for you than just what you've been forced to endure. I looked at him, trying to grasp what he was saying. I wasn't asking for anything. I didn't need anything. But the way he spoke made me wonder if, maybe, there was a different path ahead of me. I don't know if I'm capable of that, I murmured. I've never known how to live for myself. Maybe it's time to find out, he said softly. You already give so much to everyone around you. Maybe now it's time to start giving that same care to yourself. Maybe it's time to let someone else care for you too. I felt vulnerable but not uncomfortable. In fact, I felt like something had been lifted. Like for the first time, someone saw me without wanting to take something from me. He just wanted me to be okay. And the girls? I asked, searching for a way to shift the focus away from me. He let out a soft laugh. I have a surprise for them. Something simple, but I think they'll love it. Deep down, I knew that Alexander's surprises went far beyond material gifts. He wasn't just offering help. He was offering something deeper, the possibility of a different future, one where maybe I wouldn't have to carry it all alone anymore. When I left the hotel, the strangeness had faded. Something inside me had started to believe, maybe for the first time, that things could really get better. That this wasn't just a passing dream, that Alexander's kindness wasn't some fleeting charity. I still didn't know exactly what the future held for us, but at least now I knew I could be part of something greater, something that wasn't only about sacrifice and survival. After all, who was I really? Maybe it was time to finally find out. I was still trying to make sense of everything that had happened over the past few weeks when Alexander called. His voice on the other end of the line was gentle but direct. Caroline, would you be able to meet me tomorrow afternoon? There's something I'd like to discuss with you. Something important. I didn't ask what it was. I just said yes. The truth is, my intuition already knew whatever he was about to say would change something. And that scared me. That afternoon, I left the girls with the neighbor and walked to the address he sent. An elegant but discreet building on a tree-lined street in the old part of town. The cold had started to settle in again. The trees were bare, their branches like thin hands pointing toward the sky, and my heart was restless, as if it could feel the weight of a decision I hadn't made yet. When I arrived, a receptionist guided me to the top floor. The room where Alexander waited had glass walls and a breathtaking view. It felt like the entire city fit within that frame. Tiny cars, glowing lights, people moving back and forth, everything in constant motion. I felt small, but not invisible. He greeted me with a calm smile. Though his eyes said something else, they were alert, intense, as if they were waiting for my soul to arrive. Not just my body. Thank you for coming. Caroline, he said, offering me a seat. I know your schedule is tight, so I'll be brief. I nodded, trying to steady the nervous flutter growing inside me. These past few months, I've been following not just your story, but who you are. Your strength, your dignity, and more than anything, your way of caring for people. And that is rare, very rare. I just stared at him, unsure of what to say. I'm about to open a new hotel. It's in the final stages of construction. It's going to be a model space, a concept we're still shaping, but with a very different focus, people. And for that, I need someone who represents this concept from the very beginning, someone with integrity, empathy, structure, and heart. And I thought of you. My stomach flipped. I was sure I had misunderstood. I'm sorry. Are you offering me a job? He smiled. Yes, I want you to be the head house manager of the new hotel. You'd oversee the housekeeping team, coordinate apartment prep, manage daily routines. You'd live on site, have full meals included, complete support for your daughters, and a stable salary with the possibility of bonuses as the project grows. My hands started to sweat. It was too much to take in at once. My body wanted to say yes before my mind could even process it, but I couldn't react. All I could say was, I've never done anything like that. I've never managed anything. I'm just... Caroline, he interrupted gently but firmly. You already manage 3 jobs, 2 daughters, and an entire life with more competence than many executives I've met. The only difference is that no one's handed you a badge yet. Those words hit hard, because for the first time, someone was offering me a place, not out of pity, but out of recognition. I don't have a degree, I murmured, but you have character, and that's worth more than any diploma. The rest we can teach you. And if you want to finish your education, we can help with that too. That's not a barrier, it's just one more step. I stayed quiet. Emotion rose like a wave, catching me off guard. And the girls? I asked. I've already reserved a comfortable suite in the hotel for you. 2 bedrooms, a living area, and a kitchen. There's a nearby school with open enrollment. If you'd like, I can go with you to make sure everything is set up for them. It couldn't be real. It felt like a dream. Or a movie. Why are you doing this? I whispered, eyes filled with tears. Why, me? Alexander stood and walked to the window. He was quiet for a moment before answering. Because you represent the kind of world I want to help build. Because you don't know it, but you've already changed something in me. And because you deserve more. It's that simple. My eyes filled, but I didn't cry. Because in that moment, I realized this wasn't just about a job. It was about giving back to myself, something I'd lost long ago. The right to dream of a future. You don't have to decide now, he said, sitting again. But if you want it, the hotel opens in 30 days. And the position is yours. All you have to do is say yes. I left without giving an answer. I just promised I'd think about it. And I did, for days. I walked the streets like someone lost in a maze of memories. I replayed the nights of extreme exhaustion, the times I fainted on the subway from hunger, the nights I prayed without believing in miracles anymore. I thought of the girls, of the drawings Lucy taped to the walls, of Abby's dreamy eyes. I thought of the Christmas tree, the sweet rolls at the bakery, that first gesture. Alexander wasn't saving me. He was offering me a ladder. All I had to do was find the courage to climb the first step. The following week, I put on my best coat, and it was still old, but clean, and went back to that glass building. Alexander greeted me with a look that already seemed to know my answer. If you still want it to be me, I began, my voice shaking. Then, I'm in, he smiled, a smile of relief, but also certainty. Welcome, Caroline. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I belonged to something, to a new beginning. What I didn't know yet was that this hotel wouldn't just change my life. It was about to change Alexander's too. The first time I walked through the revolving doors of the new hotel, holding Lucy and Abby's hands, it felt like we were stepping into another planet. Everything inside was different. The muffled sound of footsteps on the thick carpet, the soft glow of crystal chandeliers hanging like stars from the ceiling, the subtle scent of lavender mixed with the freshness of new wood. The girls were mesmerized. Abby pointed at every detail like she was exploring a castle. Lucy, always more observant, studied the faces of the staff and whispered questions like, "Do they live here too, Mummy? Or do you think we'll have princess beds?" I didn't know how to answer, because deep down, it still felt like a dream. Alexander was waiting for us in the lobby. He wore a dark suit without a tie, as if trying to appear less CEO and more human. When he saw the girls, he crouched down to their level with a warm smile. "Welcome, young ladies. Your suite is ready, with everything you asked for." And one surprise. They ran ahead with the receptionist, who already knew their names. I stayed behind, looking at Alexander with a mix of gratitude and nervousness. "It all feels so big," I murmured. "It's just a building, Caroline." What really matters is what you make of it. We rode up to the 5th floor together. The suite looked like something from a magazine in a waiting room. 2 bedrooms with large windows, a small living room with a linen couch, a round wooden table, and a fully equipped kitchen. But what moved me most were the details. A vase of fresh flowers on the table, a children's painting framed on the wall, and little wooden plaques on each. Bedroom door, Lucy's room and Abby's castle. I sat on the edge of the bed. It was too soft, almost like it was trying to hold me in a way I didn't yet know how to accept. The next day I started officially. Alexander introduced me to the team as the head of housekeeping, with a natural ease that left me breathless. The stares were mixed, some curious, others clearly skeptical. After all, I didn't look like an executive. I didn't talk like one either. But there was one thing none of them could take from me: life experience. "Good morning, everyone," I said in my first meeting. "I didn't come here to be the boss. I came to work with you. I've been on your side, feeling the weight on your back and the looks of contempt from people who've never made a bed in their life. So I'm here with respect, but also with responsibility. What we build here will reflect in every guest who walks through these doors. So let's do it right, with care, with integrity." The silence that followed was thick, but slowly I saw some heads nodding. I started by visiting every department: laundry, room cleaning, suite preparation, in-room service, amenities. I made sure to be involved, to wear the uniform, to roll up my sleeves, because for me, leading was never about giving orders. It was about serving with purpose. In the first week, I reorganized the delivery system, created a suggestion notebook so the staff could propose improvements, redesigned the shift communication process to avoid the usual small errors that nobody questioned before. Alexander observed from a distance. He didn't interfere. He just supported. Sometimes I'd find little notes on my desk. "Your way of leading is rare. Keep going." Or "The team feels lighter already. That's your doing." Over time, I realized the hotel was taking shape, not just in furniture and walls, but in relationships. The cook started baking extra cookies for the girls. The security guards greeted them by name. And the same employees who once looked at me with indifference now gave me warm, genuine smiles. But the deepest transformation was in me. For the first time, I had a place, a roof that was more than shelter, a space where my opinion mattered, where my presence had weight. Nights felt different too. I slept peacefully. Fear no longer woke me. Lucy and Abby decorated their own rooms with drawings, string lights and little cutouts taped to the walls. At night, they read to me, laughed together, hugged me tight before bed. And from time to time, Alexander would appear. Never intrusive, always respectful. Sometimes he'd have lunch with the staff in the cafeteria, sitting just like anyone else. Other times, he'd bump into the girls in the courtyard and listen to their stories with a kind of attention I had never seen in any man. He had a way of being fully present, and it caught me off guard. One day after one of his visits, Abby asked me, "Mommy, is Mr. Alexander like an angel?" I smiled, surprised. "Why do you think that?" "Because he listens with his heart." That sentence stayed with me for days. One evening after I put the girls to bed, I stepped out onto the balcony of our suite. The city sparkled below, and for the first time I felt peace. Not the absence of problems, but the presence of purpose. There was still a lot to be done. Many adjustments in the hotel, the systems, the team, but what was already clear was that this place was more than a job. It was a fresh start. It was where I could finally bloom. What I didn't know yet was that the hotel was transforming Alexander too, and that despite all the power he held, he was also learning through us what it meant to truly have a home. Life at the hotel began to unfold like music, each shift a note, each encounter a rhythm, and within that flow, something new started to emerge, something I couldn't quite name, but that showed itself softly in small gestures, lingering glances and quiet constancy. Alexander started showing up more often, not as the CEO of a hotel empire, but as someone who slowly was becoming part of our everyday life. Sometimes he brought illustrated books for Lucy, knowing her love for art. Other times, He helped Abby with giant puzzles in the lobby, and he always did it without rush, without forcing anything. Just being there, fully present, attentive, kind. The staff no longer found it strange. Some even commented that he seemed happier since the hotel opened. And in a way, I knew that was true. There was something in Alexander that was changing too. As if beneath all the layers of discipline and control, he was rediscovering the simple joy of belonging. One evening, after a long shift, I walked through the courtyard and saw him sitting on a wooden bench. Abby was asleep in his lap, and Lucy was quietly drawing beside him. The scene stopped me in my tracks. He saw me and brought a finger to his lips, signaling silence, then gestured toward the sky. The stars had just begun to peek through the early evening haze. I sat beside them, and for a few minutes no one said a word. The silence between us was light, as if it already said everything. "They're incredible, Caroline," he murmured. "I don't know how you managed to keep so much tenderness alive through so much hardship." I took a deep breath. I just knew I couldn't let them lose their childhood. Even when I was falling apart inside, they kept me standing. He looked down at Abby, peacefully asleep. "And you? Who kept you standing?" The question struck like a stone gently thrown. I stared at my hands for a few seconds. "I don't know. Maybe just a stubborn hope that someday all of this would make sense," he nodded, like someone who understood more than they were saying. That night he walked us back to our suite. The girls were so comfortable with him. By now that they didn't even ask if he could stay, they just took his hand. Lucy wanted to show him her latest drawing. Abby wanted him to taste a cookie she'd helped make with the kitchen staff. I watched it all from a distance, trying to understand what was happening between us. After they fell asleep, he stood on the balcony for a while. I walked over. "You don't have to stay, Alexander. It's getting late." He looked out over the city lights. "It doesn't bother me to be here. On the contrary, it feels good." I stayed quiet, and then, for the first time, I said what had been stuck inside me for weeks. "I'm afraid." He turned to me gently. "Afraid of what?" "Of getting used to this. Of believing I can have something good, and then losing it all again." He didn't answer right away. He just stepped closer slowly. "Caroline, you're not alone anymore, and this isn't something I plan to take away tomorrow or next week. I'm here because I want to be, and as long as you'll have me, I'll stay." It wasn't an empty promise. It was a quiet declaration of presence, not from someone who demands space, but from someone building it, patiently with care. From that night on, things changed, without being said, without being planned. On weekends, Alexander started joining us for lunch. He took the girls on small walks through the courtyard. He bought Lucy a set of professional watercolors and helped Abby plant sunflowers in tiny pots. And I began to let myself feel. I felt joy in our daily rhythms. I felt safe watching him with the girls. And with the scariest part, I felt his absence when he wasn't around. It wasn't a whirlwind romance. It wasn't reckless attraction. It was something much rarer, the slow building of deep affection. The staff began to notice too. One of them even joked, "Mr. Harris smiles more these days." "But only when you're around, Caroline." I just smiled, pretending not to understand. Then came his birthday. I found out by accident, overhearing a hallway conversation. Alexander didn't plan to celebrate. He told the team it was just another ordinary day. But to us, it wasn't. The girls decided to surprise him. Lucy made a giant card with a drawing of all of us, sitting on the courtyard bench. Abby wrote, in her still, clumsy handwriting, "You're like a hug from the sky." That evening, he arrived at the hotel around 8. When he stepped into our suite, the lights were off. "Anyone home?" he called out, smiling. And then the girls lit a small cake they'd helped bake with the kitchen staff. A simple cake, but full of care. On top it read, "Happy New Chapter, Uncle Alexander." He stood there, clearly moved. The girls ran to hug him, and I stood off to the side, watching. "All this was their idea?" he asked. I nodded. "They wanted you to know you're special, that you're part of our lives." He looked at me, and there was something new in his gaze, a different kind of light. That night we ate together. We laughed, we talked, and for the first time we took a picture, the four of us, me, the girls, and Alexander, together. We weren't officially a family, but we were a family, even without a label, even without a name, a family that was forming one gesture at a time. And I didn't yet know where it would lead. But deep down, something whispered, maybe the home I've always searched for wasn't a place. Maybe it was this. The small hands in mine, the silence that doesn't weigh, the love that doesn't demand, the presence that doesn't leave. After the girl's surprise, Alexander began coming to the hotel more often, but in a different way. It wasn't a visit anymore. It was a presence, a quiet extension of our routine. And at the same time, I noticed something changing in him, not in how he dressed or spoke, but in his eyes. Alexander was starting to let himself be affected. He used to walk in with perfect posture, precise speech, a distant gaze. Now he arrived unannounced, left the tie at home, accepted Abby's slightly burnt cookies without complaint, and carried Lucy's drawings in his leather briefcase like they were official documents. One cold afternoon in March, Lucy asked me a question I wasn't expecting. "Mommy, does Uncle Alexander have a birthday?" I smiled. "Of course he does, sweetheart. Everyone does. Does he celebrate it?" I paused for a moment. "I don't think so. He says he prefers not to make a big deal out of it." "But why?" I didn't know how to answer, and maybe neither did he. Over the next few days, the girls started whispering plans. They talked with the kitchen staff, hid drawings, cut colorful paper, and held secret meetings with a level of excitement I hadn't seen since Christmas. When I asked about it, Abby just said, "It's a heart secret." Deep down, I already knew, and without saying much, I started to help. On his birthday, the hotel was quiet. Alexander had spent the morning in meetings and was expected back in the afternoon. The girls helped me decorate the suite's living room with simple balloons and a small craft paper sign that read, "Happy New Chapter." We placed white flowers on the table, lit scented candles, and prepared a small spread of the foods we knew he liked: rye bread, fresh cheese, strawberries, chocolate cake with ganache, and a bottle of apple juice. The cake had been made by Lucy with help from the hotel's pastry chef. It was a little lopsided, uneven, but full of love. At 7 p.m. he arrived. I opened the door before he even knocked. He had a book tucked under his arm and tired eyes. "Hey," he said, taking off his coat. "I'm exhausted." "Then come in. Tonight, you don't have to think about anything." He smiled, a little curious. When he stepped into the room and saw everything, he froze. The girls were hiding behind the sofa. As soon as he crossed the doorway, they jumped out. "Surprise?" Alexander jumped slightly, then laughed, a real, almost boyish laugh. He placed a hand over his heart, visibly touched. "All of this was you?" Abby ran to him with a paper party hat. "It's yours." Lucy made the drawings. He put it on without hesitation. Lucy handed him a gift, a box made of cardboard, painted blue, filled with drawings she and Abby had made, scenes from everyday life at the hotel, the Christmas tree, the garden bench, the balcony at night. Alexander opened it carefully. When he saw what was inside, his eyes filled with emotion. He didn't try to hide it. He stayed silent for several seconds, touching the pages as if they were something sacred. "This is the best gift I've ever received," he said, voice husky. The girls beamed. Then we sat down to eat. We laughed, toasted with juice, shared stories. It felt like a family dinner. No etiquette, no expectations. And at some point, after the girls ran off to play, Alexander and I found ourselves alone on the balcony. He stood there, gazing at the city with a distant look. "How long has it been since you celebrated your birthday?" I asked. He sighed. "Since my parents died." His answer came like a whispered memory. I was 26, already taking over part of the family business. And suddenly I was alone, with a massive company in my hands, expectations from every side, and no real hugs anywhere near. Since then, my birthday just became a reminder. A reminder of what? He turned toward me. That everything I built didn't mean anything if I had no one to share it with. We stood in silence. A breeze passed by, making the candles flicker. "And now?" I asked softly. "Now, I feel like I'm getting something back. Not with parties or gifts, but with this. With them, with you." My chest tightened. Alexander stepped closer, not to touch me, but to say something no man had ever said to me before. Thank you for reminding me what it means to be seen. Not as a businessman, but as a person. I closed my eyes for a second. It was all so intense, and yet so simple. We went back to the living room. The girls were already sleepy. Abby was curled up on the couch, and Lucy leaned her head on my shoulder. Alexander bent down to say goodnight. Thank you, my sweet girls. This was one of the most important days of my life. We love you, Uncle Alexander, Abby mumbled, eyes nearly closed. He didn't answer. He just kissed her forehead gently. That night after he left, I stood for a while looking at the table. The half-eaten cake, the colorful papers, the little hat left behind. It wasn't a fancy dinner. It wasn't a corporate event. But it was the moment Alexander let himself come home, maybe for the first time in his life. And the most remarkable part was that home now included us, me, Lucy, Abby, even if none of us knew quite what to call it yet. The weeks following Alexander's birthday moved with a kind of quiet that felt almost suspicious. The hotel was thriving. The staff worked with lightness. The guests praised not just the service, but the atmosphere. It was as if everyone sensed that this place carried something more than luxury. It carried soul. But then the meetings began multiplying. Alexander started taking phone calls during dinner. He disappeared for hours into video conferences. The expression on his face changed, from calm to a subtle, lingering tension. I noticed but didn't ask. I knew enough to sense something deeper was happening, and that it had more to do with values than spreadsheets. Until one morning he asked to speak with me in his office. It was the first time we met there since I was hired. The glass walls now looked less transparent. The sky outside was gray, and the silence in the room felt heavier. Caroline, he began, removing his glasses and setting them gently on the desk. There's something I need to tell you, and I want you to hear it before anyone else. I nodded, trying to hide the chill that ran up my spine. The board of Harrison Comers is pressuring for radical changes. They claim the management model we've built here is emotionally inefficient. They think we're overspending on staffing, on benefits, on processes that don't scale. That's the word they used. Scale. I repeated, not fully understanding. They want the hotel to grow fast, to run like the others, cut costs, outsource everything, replace people with systems. But what really bothers them is our human model. Our model? I asked, feeling a knot tighten in my chest. Yes. The fact that we've hired people with no formal background, that we've promoted single mothers, immigrants, people society often overlooks, that we treat our staff with the same care we give our guests. They call it operational fragility. I said nothing. First came anger, then fear. And what does that mean for us? Alexander leaned forward, elbows on the desk, fingers interlocked. It means they've given me two options. Either I cut all of this and standardize the hotel to match the old model, or I step down as director, hand control over to corporate, and let them run it their way. My stomach dropped. They want you to choose between values and profit. He nodded. And what are you going to do? The question came out before I could stop it. But it was honest, because I knew this moment would reveal who Alexander really was. He took a deep breath. I didn't get into this to build just another hotel, Caroline. I did this for you, for the girls, for the team, because I was tired of systems that crush people in the name of numbers. And now I'm being tested. You already know the answer, I murmured. He looked at me. There was pain in his eyes, but there was something else too, a growing strength. I do, but it's a choice that takes courage. Because if I go through with it, I lose control of the holding. I lose funding, investors. I officially become a man alone with a vision. You'll never be alone, I replied without hesitation. He lowered his gaze, and for the first time, I saw his eyes well with tears. I never wanted you or the girls to be caught in the middle of this. I fought so hard to create a safe space for you, but now I can't promise anything. If I leave, we lose the financial support of the company. We may have to shut the hotel down, start again from scratch. I stood slowly and walked toward him, not on impulse, but because I knew it was time to stand beside him the way he had once stood beside us. I touched his hand. If this place was built with truth, then it will survive. maybe in a different form, maybe in a different building. But it's not the structure that matters. Alexander, it's what you put into it. He nodded, locking eyes with me. And if I asked you to come with me, if I walked away from all of this and wanted to start a new project somewhere else, would you come? The question hung in the air, as if time itself paused to listen. Of course I would, I said firmly. As long as the girls come with us, and as long as that somewhere else still has a soul. He smiled, relieved. Then let's do this our way, even if it's hard, even if it hurts. 2 days later, Alexander called a meeting with the board. I wasn't there. But I heard what happened. They said he entered the room without slides, without charts, only a letter in his hand. He read it aloud, saying he didn't build this project to pad spreadsheets, but to restore dignity to those who serve. He refused to support any decision that dehumanized people in the name of efficiency. And finally, he submitted his resignation as president of Harrison. Silence, shock, divided reactions. But when he left that room, he was lighter than I'd ever seen him. He came back to the hotel, took off his jacket, sat in the staff cafeteria, and announced, "We're going to start something new, but this time from the ground up. Our way." Some cried, others applauded. I just looked at him and saw a man whole, a man who didn't choose the easiest path, but the truest one. That night he found me on the balcony. "Are you ready to start over?" he asked, with that quiet smile I'd come to understand so well. I always was. I just didn't know it until now. And there, with the city glowing beneath us, life breathing quietly around us, and 2 little girls asleep in the next room, I realized something. What we build with soul, no one can tear down. Even if the building changes, even if the name on the door is different, what we created was already home. And wherever there is truth, there will always be space to begin again.